Hi there, esteemed audience, and welcome to another episode of Middle Grade Ninja. I'm your host, Rob Kent. As you know, I'm the author of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees, which is available now as an audiobook, a paperback, and the ebook is free. Yes, free to download whenever you're watching or listening to this, wherever fine ebooks are sold. Under the super secret pen name Robert Kent, I've written some young adult and adult horror novels. You can find out more about that, as well as interviews with thousands of literary agents, editors, authors, all the world's best people at middlegradeninja.com. Go there now. My guest today is none other than Elana K. Arnold, who was, and fun fact, I looked this up, you did the 7-question interview at middlegradeninja.com, and you are actually, as to date, the last 7-question interview we ever did, because that was about the same time the show was getting started.
Wow.
And I realized, people will just talk to me. We don't have to do this in a written communication form. So you, to date, are the last of the 7-question interviews.
I'm
so
honored.
Welcome.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk about books.
Well, esteemed audience knows that I never make my guests sit through me bumbling over their biography or their books. Why would you listen to me summarizing that to you? How painful that would be. So if you would, the best place to get started is just go ahead and give an overview of your background.
Well, that's a good question. So I am a Southern California author. Been writing since I was a kid, and I am a writer. I'm of everything, pretty much. Currently, I have young adult novels, middle grade novels, younger middle grade novels, a chapter book series, and several picture books, with more of each published and forthcoming. My novel, What Girls Are Made Of, was a finalist for the National Book Award in 2017. And my YA novel, Damsel, was a Printz Honor winner the next year. And my most recent middle grade novel is called The House That Wasn't There. Just today, I found out that it's on Kirkus's Best Books of the Year list. For last year, it was a pandemic book, along with a couple other publications I've had, which is certainly an interesting time for so many of us, such a challenging time as humans and as writers as well. And I'm very excited because my new book, Just Harriet, is coming out in February 1st. And it's another young chapter book, meaning that it's about 22,000 words, like A Boy Called Bat and its sequels, and it's lightly illustrated by Young Ho, and it is absolutely beautifully done. She did the cover as well as the interior art. So I'm very excited to talk about that as well. How'd I do?
That was almost 100% perfect.
Okay.
I'm going to ask you some questions because I've been obsessively going through your biography, and I want to break it down just a little bit. I was fascinated. I'm looking at your list of books. I'm like, this must be someone who's been doing this just forever. And then I saw that Sacred was just published in 2012.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh my God, all of that in 9 years? That's incredible.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Yeah. Well, I have been a writer for a long time, but I have only been publishing, I guess 9 years, coming up on 10. Although my first book came out in November of 2012, so almost the end of it even. It's one of those things where there's always a circuitous path that we're not aware of as, readers. But no path to publication in my experience is totally straight. Mine involved about a 10-year hiatus from writing after I got my master's degree, and a return to it through the form of blogging. During the Great Recession, my husband got laid off. He had the higher earning job, and we decided for various reasons to sell our house and all of our possessions and move into an old RV and hit the road. And we took a long trip up through the Pacific Northwest. And I started a blog called People Do Things. And it was the first time I had regularly written in many years. And it's like, why shouldn't we sell our house and our belongings? People do things. We can do this thing. It's kind of the impetus for that. And I have a few quotes that I'm very proud of. One of them is People Do Things. And for the first time in my life, really, I had an audience. I was being read, not by tons of people, but I think I had a few hundred readers, and they comment and tell me about their recession stories and their time living in RVs. And it was such a fantastic feeling to be read that I decided that I was going to write a novel again. I was going to finally do it. And then we ended up in Corvallis, Oregon, where my husband and I both applied for jobs, and I got one first, teaching at OSU, composition. And we are an unschooling family. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but very child-led homeschool life, non-religious, just adventure-based. And so one of us, needed to be the more stay-at-home parent. So it became my husband, and I went back to work, and I worked very hard, and then I got very sick. And I remember walking one day across campus thinking to myself, it was pouring rain and I was carrying a stack of papers like this, and I was very ill. And I thought to myself, if I ever get the chance, I'm going to finish a novel. That's it, I'm done. If I get well enough to write again, because at the time I couldn't even see very clearly, I will finish the novel. And then I got sicker, and I had to quit my job, and we had to move back to Southern California because we didn't know if I was going to need more care. And then I got better. And then I wrote my first novel. We were living in Long Beach in a house fairly close to the water, and across the way was Catalina Island, which I've always loved. And it seemed to me to be the perfect place to set an island. Actually, it's my husband's idea to set the story there. Sacred is a novel about a girl who is not doing well in the wake of her brother's death, and a mysterious newcomer to the island. And I needed a place to set the story where there was very low crime rate and where the place was like an island. And he said, why not set it on Catalina? And I thought, there you go, perfect. So that was Sacred. I wrote Sacred very quickly. I wrote it in about 11 weeks, the first draft. And it was such a thrill to finally finish a novel. It was the first novel I ever finished on my own. I'd written some romance novels for fun with friends as a younger person, but this was my first independent book. And there you go. I found an agent, and it became my first published book. That was a very long answer to your question, Rob.
No, we love long answers here. That's fantastic, because we're going to learn all kinds of stuff that I won't know to ask if you don't give us a long answer. Although it does strike me that Sacred set on an island, and of course, Just Harriet, available February 1st, is set on an island as well.
Yes.
Have you ever lived on an island? Do you have an unspoken wish, or unfulfilled wish to live on an island?
Yeah, actually, Marble Island, the island in Just Harriet, is also it's based on Catalina Island, although it doesn't say it's called Marble Island. And it's also, funnily enough, set at a bed and breakfast. And Sacred, my first novel, is also set at a bed and breakfast on Catalina Island. So apparently I have a desire to at least pretend to live on an island and run a B&B. So I also am a big fan of Miss Marple, Michael Christie's character, who talks about a village being this place where you can know all types of people in a small, on a small scale. You don't need to leave the village to know everyone. It's the basic theory. And that's just such a great, I like as a writer, I like closed systems and small settings. And so an island is a lovely place where, everybody's there. And also, as Harriet's the first in a series of gentle mysteries. And an island and a bed and breakfast are such a great place because you have this core cast of characters that stays on the island, but then you have this rotating cast of visitors that can come, especially at a bed and breakfast. You can have new characters that come and go with each book, which seems like a pretty great device.
Well, it makes sense to me. So eventually you're going to retire too and running a bed and breakfast. And then every time somebody comes in, you'll ask them their story. Oh, that's great. Let me write that down. That's going to be my next book.
That would be a nice, influx of new stories. I think I am a giant fan of animals, and people are my favorite animal. And I am endlessly interested in what people have to say and what people's lives are like. I always say to my husband, don't you just wish you could line everybody up and just make them tell you their whole story, all their stories, all their secrets? And he says, no, why would you want to do that? I just, it's one of the core differences between us is I would very much like to hear everybody's stories.
Well, I know from the books that I've read for a Steeped Audience, I've just reread A Boy Called Bat, which we'll talk about some. And then, of course, Just Harriet. And I read the two sequels to A Boy Called Bat, all of which feature animals very prominently. And I know you've got, from your bio, a menagerie of animals around you. For those watching us, they can see your dog right behind you there. How many and there's the cat. How many animals do you have at this time?
Right now, we have the fewest we've had in many years. We have 7, which is still a lot of animals. We have 2 dogs, the little baby Poppy and a big giantess named Phoebe. And we have Joachim here, who was inherited from my grandmother after she passed, and a hairless cat named Crumpet. And we have a gold-capped conure named Bird, and 2 desert tortoises who are currently sleeping in a box of straw in the garage.
And that's the smallest number in years. Did you have animals living with you in the RV as well?
We did, actually, yes. We had another small dog named Sherman and a ferret named Vegas. Yes, and ferrets, as you probably don't know this, but are ill-gotten in California. They're not technically legal in California, so we purchased him in Las Vegas, Nevada, and drove him home, and that's why his name was Vegas. So when we got up to Oregon, to the border, he became a legal pet overnight, which was a big relief. And then we also had 2 hairless cats, but my mother-in-law held on to them until we landed in Oregon, and then she drove them up to us. Hairless cats are not big fans of Oregon weather.
That Charmin with an S?
Karen, my mother-in-law,
Okay.
Karen. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, I don't imagine hairless. You said hairless cats would not be a big fan of Oregon. The weather just doesn't agree with them.
It's just a little cold. Yeah, cold and damp. They like it better here in Southern California.
Oh well, then I'm happy they're back where they belong.
Yes.
So I'm curious about life in the RV, and I know that, was it Far From Home is the
Far From Fair? Yes. Yeah.
We'll cover that. While you're living, I understand, you bought your house at the top of the market, had to sell it at a loss. But you sold your possessions as well. Is that a conscious decision on top of that? We're going to be houseless for a while anyway. Let's just do no possessions and see how that goes for us for a while.
Yeah, we didn't know where we would land, and furniture. At first, I was thinking, oh, we have to keep some of the stuff, and then one morning I woke up and I was like, let's just sell all of it. I mean, the only things that mattered were the 4 of us. I mean, obviously more mattered, but as far as stuff to put in the RV, and we had to bring Vegas, who was my son's special friend. We all loved him, and Sherman, our dog. The cats, were a little bit more. They were more flexible as far as cats don't need people, I don't think, in quite the way dogs do. And so they stayed with my mother-in-law for several months. And yeah, we just figured, it's just stuff. We can buy more stuff, which turned out to be true. When we left Oregon, we also sold almost everything, came home with just the animals. So it was okay to let go. At first it was hard, and then it felt really good to really pare down to just the essentials. It felt freeing. It really opened up time in my brain to write again too. I mean, there was no laundry to do, and there were no toys to sort, and there were no books to shelve, and there was just nature and family and time. And it was an interesting decision. My husband had been unhappy at his job for a while, and when he got laid off, it felt like an opening. If we weren't going to try it then when? So we thought we would have an adventure and see where it led us, which was terrifying.
Well, you had this wonderful clarifying, I'm sure, eventually wonderful clarifying moment where we say, okay, well, now I know exactly what matters to me. Then your health goes downhill, you nearly die. And so then I'm assuming somewhere in there, it's okay, that's not going to happen in the time that I have, however long that is. I'm going to write. I'm assuming is what happened just because of your output.
Well, I didn't nearly die. I mean, I thought I was going to, but turned out, I don't actually know completely what was wrong with me, but when I started feeling better, I kind of decided that was enough of going to doctors for me, and I was just going to be glad that I felt good. So, it was, I think all those other years that I hadn't been writing, I had been filling the well. I think all of us are full of stories, and everything we do and everything we read and everyone we meet and everything we fear fills our well. And so when I began writing in earnest, I had a lot to write about, and a real desire to continue to tell stories. And publishing it's a business. Writing is an art, revision is a craft, and writing and publishing is a business. And I'm very interested in the business side of things as well as the art and the craft. I like publishing. I like selling my books. I like meeting readers. I like having relationships with editors. And I've been very fortunate that I have continued to find homes for stories across the whole spectrum. In fact, I have an adult novel that is going to be going out in January to, sorry, knocked on wood and my dog got excited, going out to agents, or to editors, excuse me. So we'll see.
I mean, fingers crossed, but if I'm an acquiring editor, I look just at your bio and I see it's nothing but everything you write wins awards. It's I would think it's a no-brainer, but.
Well, thank you. We'll see what the crossover is to the adult side of things. I don't know about that, but I'm pretty excited about this new book. So we'll see what happens.
We've also been writing young adult now for long enough that I would think some of those young adults have gone on to become adults. And
I would think so. And I also know that my audience is very divided. Of my young adult work, I get a lot of letters from teens, but I also get a lot of letters from adults, almost entirely people who identify as women who read my books. So I hope there's an audience for the adults. We'll see. It's a rough business. I mean, there's no guarantees in the publishing world. All this has to go back to art and craft, because those are the things we have some control over. Although even that sometimes feels like there's this magical element that we don't have control over. So there you go. Control is an illusion, Rob.
Yes, there's probably some truth to that, but when you did Sacred, I know you found an agent almost right away, right? And then they were able to get you a deal for it. Read almost like a fairy tale version of the author's story. Was that your experience, or not quite at all?
I mean, there's always a dark side to every fairy tale, right? My agent is
yours, yes.
Yeah, his name is Ruben Pfeffer, and he's been my agent as long as I have been publishing. I sent out to a few agents, and then I realized actually it's kind of a funny story. My first book is about Kabbalah, mysticism. It has a sort of romantic mystical thread, and Kabbalah underpins the story. And I Jewish, but not actively religious, culturally Jewish and familially Jewish, but practically not religious. And I took a course in Kabbalah and I studied it quite a bit before I wrote the book and as I wrote the book, but I felt like, oh, maybe it would be a good thing to have a partner who knew more about Judaism on a practical level. And I did. And so after I got a couple of rejections and my book was out still with a few other agents, I Googled Jewish children's literary agent. And up came Ruben Pfeffer, because he had just recently spoken at a highlights seminar for Jewish themed children's literature. That's why it came up. There's no master list of which religions different agents identify with, which is a good thing. But he had spoken at this conference and there was a video clip of him speaking. And I thought, aha, this is a person I should send my book to. And he was sitting next to an editor, Françoise Bouy of Delacorte, which is an imprint of Random House. And she was obviously an agent and an editor who was interested in acquiring stories with Jewish themes. So I thought maybe that'll be my agent. Turned out, yes, indeed, she was the agent who acquired. So when I sent the manuscript, the first 3 chapters to Ruben that night, the next morning I woke up and we were, struggling financially at that point, quite a bit after leaving and returning and coming out of the recession and me struggling with health, just lots of things. And so when I got the email from him the next morning asking to read the whole book, that definitely was a fairy tale moment. And when he wrote to me a few days later asking for a conversation, that felt fantastic too. And then when we sold the book to Françoise Bouy on Valentine's Day of 2011, that felt pretty fantastic too. I remember telling Ruben Pfeffer he was my Valentine that day. And now every time we sell a manuscript, we say Happy Valentine's Day to each other, which is charming and adorable. And, but I mean, publishing is a business and businesses can be really rough. And very shortly after Sacred and its sequel were acquired, and in the meanwhile, they acquired a third book from me, a standalone novel called Burning. There was the Random Penguin merger. I call it the Random Penguin Slaughter of 2012. And, bad things happened. My editor was laid off. My books at Random House lost their champion. I had 3 books. One had just been published. The other 2 hadn't even been published yet, that, you know, suddenly were orphaned. And that was really rough. Things got really, really hard. They didn't really want to acquire my 4th YA that I had written, a novel called Infandist, which I think is fantastic. And I didn't really know what to do with it. It was very different. And Ruben suggested I should write a middle grade novel just to see. And so I wrote The Question of Miracles, which is set in Corvallis, Oregon, where it rains all the time. And that book found a home with HMH. But it's a very up and down thing, publishing. There's no straight, like, oh, you sold a book, now you'll sell all your books. Or, oh, you sold your book, now your advances will only get bigger. That's not been true for me. Oh, you won an award, now you clearly are an expert and know how to revise, and all your edit letters will get shorter and simpler from here. None of that has been true for me. It's all been very up and down. But what remains is the love of story and my desire to tell the truth to kids.
That has been one of the great assumptions that's been challenged by meeting so many authors through the show. In fact, I wrote about that this year's author January post. So, esteemed audience, if you're curious to know more, check out my January post, author year, whatever it is, author year 8, I think. But what I've learned in talking to so many writers is that I always had this assumption that eventually you would cross a finish line and you go, oh, I did it. I'm a writer now, and here's all the money and the fame, just like I knew would be waiting. And I'm good. I'll just go quietly write in a cabin, and it will be fine from here on out. And I've talked to people for whom I assumed that would have been true. And what I learned time and time again is, no, you still have to be a human, if nothing else. You've still got plenty of good days, bad days, things that can impact you. But even people, well, she said it on the show, and it's an example I used when I had Catherine Patterson on. Mm-hmm. Obviously a living legend. And that's not me talking. Congress, the Library of Congress voted her a living legend. She told me that she feels like every time she finishes a book, still, she thinks that's the end of her career. When people read this, it's over. Like, really? That's crazy to me. But I thought, well, my God, if Catherine Patterson doesn't feel that she crossed that line, I'm finished, then that there's no hope for me. That's not, that's not going to be an option. So through that up and down and craziness, how do you maintain a sense of calm, or do you?
I mean, the art and the craft of writing are different than the business of writing. And I think if I have any ability to keep my eye on what matters, is that it's dangerous for writers to put business before art and craft. And that is where you lose sight of how to make good art. I think the only way to tell good stories is to focus on the things that interest, terrify, titillate, excite, things you think are too hard for you, but you just want to try anyway, and to work on those stories. One line that you do kind of cross, I think, is that I found that I still don't know how I'm going to finish something or how I'm going to revise something, but now at least I can look at my body of work and say, well, I figured it out before, and so odds are I'll be able to figure it out again. So the first time I wrote a book, I didn't know if I could really finish a book. The second time I wrote a book, I knew I'd finished a book, so probably I could finish another book. Same goes with revision. Something like selling, that's totally different. I sold another book, but that does not mean I'm going to sell this book. I think anytime we think about business before art and craft, we're giving someone else power over our work. I mean, when you get to the business side of things, someone else does have some power over your work, right? But when it comes to art and craft, I think you have to be alone in your own head first. That's some advice that I think is very good advice. I think I'm full of very good advice, and I think that's one good piece of advice: is don't put business ahead of art and craft. And you're the only person you ever know is going to read your story is you. You're the only person who's ever guaranteed to read your work. And so why not write something that satisfies and delights you?
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, if you're not at least making yourself happy, what are you doing?
Yeah. And if you're not surprising and challenging yourself too. So I write a bunch of different stuff because I'm interested in a bunch of different stuff. And I am very much wanting to always surprise and delight myself.
Do you have like a list of these are the things I want to write, like a bucket list? I will hit all of these types of stories before I pass from this mortal coil, or do you just kind of go around until you can feel like you're divining for water and you feel something that bed and breakfast on an island? That's the one.
Yeah, that's a great question. No, I don't have any sort of list at all. I'm not real great with that whole sort of 1 year, 5 year, 10 year sort of plan at all. It's more that to me, every story starts with something that I see, something that I remember, something that I feel, plus a what if. And then I'm curious and I follow the curiosity, and it leads me into different places depending on what it is that I'm curious about. For example, with Red Hood, I began that book because I was ice skating in Yosemite, an outdoor skating rink. And it was Thanksgiving time, and it was cold, and there were these big trees all around, and there was a big full moon in the sky, and I had just started my period. And I thought to myself, werewolves cycle with moons. My body cycles with the moon. What if there was a girl who, when she begins her period, finds that with her menses comes the ability to hunt and kill werewolves? That's a cool idea, right? And I had never read that book before. And so I went back to the hotel we were staying, and I started Googling, menstruating werewolf hunter, and nothing came up. And I thought to myself, there is no way this book is going to exist very soon in one form or another. It's too good of an idea. I was so in love with my own idea that I just tripped over myself to write that first draft because I was so enthralled and in love with this idea. I had no idea how the book was going to turn out. I had no idea what I was doing, except I could tell, of course, it was a loose retelling of Red Riding Hood. So that gave me some plot points to hit. And it became a book I'm very proud of. So I just get tickled and interested in my own curiosity and follow it.
I know you're a Stephen King fan. I was chuckling. I saw you in another interview talking about reading Ernest Hemingway, Stephen King, and John Irving. I'm like, oh, me too. But we're about the same age, so I guess that figures. That makes sense. That's what was available at the time. Weren't you a big horror fan, a big werewolf fan, and you just been waiting for that right moment to tell your werewolf story?
I don't think I'm particularly a big horror fan. Like the Stephen King that I do like. I mean, horror is okay. I like some horror. I like. My favorite Stephen King is Eyes of the Dragon, which is, have you read that one?
Of course.
Oh yeah. So that one is I love much of Stephen King. I think Carrie figures into Red Hood, very much so. And I think Eyes of the Dragon is another source book that inspired Damsel. So I love that. I love his different seasons, The Body and Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption. I love his book on writing. I hold on to the horror so much in my brain as I held on to that sort of like, I don't know, I guess, I don't know what you call the stuff that I love of his the most. But the horror is interesting to me, but not as interesting as like his novellas, which is hilarious that he calls them novellas because they're as long as my novels for the most part, many of them. So I am a big Stephen King fan, but it's not his whole oeuvre that speaks to me necessarily. I think I forgot the question though.
I just want to know if you'd always been looking for a spot for werewolves.
No, not until they occurred to me. I think werewolves are interesting, but it wasn't until I had this idea it was more about cycles and danger and who has power in the Red Riding Hood story. Fairy tales are always interesting to me. I think it's the fairy tales that were interesting to me and the different ways wolves show up in fairy tales and who has power in the Red Riding Hood story. And who saves the day? Ultimately, it's the woodcutter, right? He shows up and cuts open the wolf to free the Red Riding Hood and her grandmother, and then they fill his belly full of stones and sew him back up, the wolf, so that when he wakes up, the stones in him will kill him. It's this very convoluted way to kill something. but that was super interesting to me. Who has power and who doesn't is something that I think is interesting to me in almost all of my work. And one of the reasons why is because of childhood and my experience too as a cisgendered girl. Who has power when it comes to children, and who has power when it comes to my body, and who doesn't, is something that I think is a thematic through line in all my work, including my picture books.
Yeah, it hadn't occurred to me, because I hadn't thought about Little Red Riding Hood for a very long time until I heard you talking about, oh, Red, that does end with just some random dude showing up and like, I'll make it right. What?
Yeah, and he has the axe. So I wanted to, I was kind of interested in
the story level.
Like, I was interested in reframing that story and giving the axe, to the Red Riding Hood.
Well, good for you for, well, I haven't read it yet. It's
I hope you like it.
But I'm assuming you make some improvements upon that.
Well, I certainly tell my version of it. I also really like having a story that's in a conversation with, I think all stories are in conversation with other stories, but I have a Red story that is in conversation with the Red stories that came before. And I hope that my story will, spark other people to say, well, I didn't like what she did here, and I'm going to tell it this other way, and will allow my story to exist in conversation with books that haven't been written yet. What an honor it would be for me if other writers pushed back against something I did or took something I did a step further, and I could be part of that conversation ongoing.
So if you became part of something like Kindle Worlds or whatever, where people were actively writing fan fiction, you would be great with that?
I have no idea. I don't think anyone's ever written any fan fiction based on my work. My daughter loves reading fan fiction, so she probably would consider me to be a much more impressive writer if she happened across fan fiction that was based on my work. I think once I have put my story in the world, it doesn't belong to me anymore. I still own the copyright, by the way, so that I'm not talking about. But as far as people playing with my characters, as long as they're not, trying to take my intellectual property, I think, stories belong to everyone. Just in the way that, when I read Stephen King's Eyes of the Dragon, I would definitely think that book, as well as one of Anne Rice's books that we spoke about earlier, influence the story that became Damsel. And I mean, of course, all stories are in conversation with the books that came before and the stories that came before. And every book is also an artifact of the time in which it is written. So the book I write, dealing with the same questions of power that Anne Rice was dealing with, I'm going to look at differently in 2019 than she looked at it in the 80s. Every book is influenced by every book the author ever read, whether they know it or not.
Well, I saw that AMC is plotting to do, well, they've done it. They're going to release some show based around the witches. And I was just like, how do you do that on a non-cable network? That's a series that I don't think AMC, where they do The Walking Dead, and now they're doing The Witches and Lasher and all of the Witching Hour, I think was the first one.
Yeah.
Just her whole.
I haven't read that one. Yeah.
Well, it has many scenes that I assume will be too hot for television, or we'll get some sort of silhouetted shadow version.
Probably, yeah. There's just lots of ways to tell the same story, probably, yeah.
Well, I want to talk about your process and how you work, but probably the best way to do that is let's start by talking about Just Harriet, and then we can talk about how that came to be. So true to my word, I will not summarize your book. What does this esteemed audience need to know about Just Harriet?
Just Harriet, I think the first thing to know about this book is that it is a book. So Just Harriet was written after the Bat books. And the Bat books, A Boy Called Bat and Its Sequels, have reached an audience far larger than my other books, in part because it was chosen as a Global Read Aloud. And so a lot of schools picked up the book, and the book has really become, in some schools, a staple where it gets read every year. In some schools, it's been chosen as a one school read or even a one district read. So it's been read by lots of kids. And so one of my core beliefs as a writer is that my job is to tell a story that I love. But I had this interesting challenge with Just Harriet in that I know that there's probably going to be an audience for this book, where I never think about audience. I very much did, when I started thinking about just Harriet for the first time, think about the people who loved that, and a story, kind of story I would like to give those kids. And what I love most about Bat is it is a story full of gentle, loving kindness that centers the really big emotions of childhood through one specific child's perspective. In that case, Bat is a kid with autism who loves a skunk. And so the big questions of neuroatypicality and parent-child relationships and friendship is all filtered through his perspective. And so I wanted to write a book that did that, but differently. So that was what I went into writing this book with, the knowledge that I wanted to write something that took care of its readers, something that was full of gentle, loving kindness and animals. That was what I knew first about Harriet. But when I started writing it, I was very surprised that it came out in the first person point of view. My middle grade novels have always been written in close third person, but this book came out and the very first sentence in this book is, my name is Harriet Wormer. There are some things you should know about me before I tell you everything else. Let's start with the worst things first. And that's how the story began. And so yeah, it started in a very different place for me. It's a story about a girl named Harriet who goes to spend some time on the island, Marble Island, with her grandmother Nanu, because her mother is having a complicated pregnancy and is on bed rest, and her dad travels for work, so she needs to go somewhere where she can be looked after, and she's resentful. And she has a cat named Matzo Ball that she takes with her to the island, and a gentle mystery unfolds. But the bigger mystery, I think, is why does Harriet lie so much? And what are Harriet's needs, and how can she find ways to meet them herself? So again, it's a book about a kid with big emotions. And, you know, I think Harriet is a kid with anxiety. I was definitely a kid with anxiety. And the people who love her.
When you sit down, how much of an idea do you have where it's a surprise when the first line is in first person? It's just like, oh, the writing spirits, the muse, whatever it is, moves me to write it this way? Or is it, I have a conscious plan? Especially with this, since there's a mystery, I assume you know the solution before you start.
No, one more thing. Actually, I listened to a very smart novelist, Mary Loeb, gave a talk. She's a mystery writer. And it was a fantastic talk a few years ago. It was at Hamline, where I teach. And she gave a talk, I'm sorry about the barking, about mysteries, and how she says she doesn't know the ending of the mystery when she starts writing it. And I found that to be incredibly freeing, because I almost never know the ending of a book when I start. The only book I've ever known how it was going to end was Damsel. I knew the ending of that book before I began. It's the only book before or since that I knew the ending. So I didn't know what would happen, what the mystery would be even. I just knew that Harriet would go to this island, and I had an idea for who she would stay with and the pets. That was about all I started with. So usually when I'm writing, I know maybe I know the voice. Usually it's one thing. It's either character, setting, or plot that I get first. In this case, it was character. That was the same way. I knew who the story would be about before I knew anything else. Sometimes I have an idea for plot. Red Hood and Damsel both presented plot first. I knew what was going to happen, maybe not the whole way through, but I had, like with Red Hood, I knew I was going to follow the story of Red Riding Hood. So I had some plot points to hit. Damsel, I knew the ending. I didn't quite know how I was going to get there. And then sometimes it's setting, like Far From Fair and The Question of Miracles are both books where I knew the setting first before I knew who was going to be in the story or what was going to happen. And so then whichever thing presents first, that's the thing I follow. And the other things show up along the way. So in this case, as I followed Harriet and just listened to her delightful voice and was tickled by the lies she told, other things started to arise that turned into setting and plot. Yes, now I am not a mystery writer. And so this was a really scary thing for me to attempt, is to write a mystery. Although I think The House That Wasn't There has some mystery attached to it. In general, I don't think of myself as a plot forward writer, and mysteries are very plot forward. So I luckily have a fantastic editor. In fact, this book is dedicated to him. For Jordan Brown, my editor and friend. Jordan did a lot of helpful conversations with me around plot and mystery. In fact, we're in the middle of doing it again for the sequel to Just Harriet, which I'm revising right now. So no, I didn't know what would happen or what the mystery would be or how the mystery, and a lot of things that young writers should know is that when you look at a book, there's this assumption that it came out in that order. And that is not always true. And in my case, it's often not true when it comes to things having to do with plot. And you'll say, oh, the author must have known that this was going to be the answer because look at the clue that they planted way back here. Well, sometimes that clue that they planted in chapter 2 didn't get added until draft 4. And so it's never compare your manuscript to a published book because you're comparing two completely different creatures. And that is actually, I teach a class called Revision Season. And one of the things I do in that class is I show writers that are in the class versions of my book, of scenes in my book prior to the final manuscript. Because I think it's very helpful to, and how often you get to do that. It's not often that you get to see how the whatever was made, the muffin, I don't know what the metaphor is, but you don't usually get to see the sausage, how the sausage was made.
I like muffin better.
Yeah, I like muffins better too. So I just think that that's something I really struggled with as a kid. Was I knew I wanted to be a writer. I didn't think I was a writer, which I was wrong about. If you want to be a writer and you're writing at all, or even if you're reading and thinking and imagining and asking what if, to me, you are a writer already. I was comparing my scribbly notes and my bad spelling and the fact that I couldn't even write in a straight line, even with lined pages, to finished books, which left me always, of course, feeling desperately sad. So yeah, we don't always know what we're doing, writers. In fact, that's why we have multiple drafts. Is because it takes us often that many times to figure out what the story's about and what the plot's about and what the character arc is going to be.
Well, I don't always know what I'm doing, but I assumed you did. This is
know something. I always know something. I know that I am really interested in my story. I don't even always know why I'm interested, but if I'm not really interested, that's a death knell for a project. If I'm doing it because which I don't do, but I have been tempted to because I think it'll sell, or because it feels like this is in the ether and there should be a book about this. If it's not a book that deeply interests me, it would be a mistake to follow that.
So when do you know that you're definitely interested, and how often do you have false leads where you thought you were, but no, on second thought, by chapter 2, I'm not into it?
If I get to 10,000 words, I usually am committed. I know there's a lot of people who do writing exercises, who journal in 5 different points of view of the different characters, who, build out their story in all these different ways that are just for fun, and those things don't become part of the book. But I almost never do that. I am a storyteller, and I just like to tell the story straight through. And sometimes that means that in second or third draft, I need to take out big chunks and write new big chunks. That happens a lot. But if I have 10,000 words of a story, that to me usually feels like a pretty big arrow in the direction of I'm really interested. Now, I wrote an entire book.
For Just Harriet, when that's half the book you've written?
Well, I think with Just Harriet, it's a little bit different because it's farther into my career. And this book I sold on, a proposal and several first chapters. So I knew Harriet was going to be a book. It had to be, which is a different part of the career process when business does coexist with art and craft. But I had started thinking about Just Harriet actually several years ago, and I'd written another book. I think it was like 2 or 3 chapters. It was called Just Harriet, and the character was older. She was 12, and it was a whole different story. She had a mother with chronic illness, and she and her mother were preparing to get on a train with their cat, Matzo Ball, to go somewhere. I didn't know where yet, but they were getting on this train, and she was having to negotiate the tickets with the ticket agent because her mother, was not feeling well and was sitting. And that character had a lot of anger. And which I'm all for, characters who are angry. In fact, this Harriet is angry too, although it's gentler anger, I think. And that book didn't continue. I got about 3 chapters in, and I was like, I just don't know. I didn't get the next idea. Just the next thing didn't come, and so it just sat there for a long time. And then it wasn't until I'd written The Question of Miracles, and I'd written Far From Fair. I mean, I think Harriet had been sitting in a drawer for a long time. And then I decided I wanted a book that had that gentle, loving kindness of Bat. And I came back to that Harriet character, and I saw something in her, a spark of, it's her love for her family, that had that sense of gentle, loving kindness that I wanted to follow. And then I said, well, what if she wasn't going with her mom somewhere? It's always the what if. What if she was going by herself to this, and why would she be going by herself? Well, what if her mom was having another kid? Well, how would Harriet feel about that? And all of a sudden I started having all these other ideas for how Harriet would feel, and what how she would felt about not being consulted, and how even though she loves the island and she loves her Nanu, this wasn't her choice. And she has a lot of anger, and so it went a different direction.
I love that none of the human characters appear to have survived the draft, but Matzo Ball is still there.
The cat remains unscathed, yes.
So when you're writing a character like this, because your books, the four middle grade that I've just enjoyed back to back my marathon session, they are very safe. I felt very comfortable. Like some conflict's going to happen here. Some people are going to have emotions and feelings. That's no point am I not in suspense that something might happen, but there is a sense of safeness that this isn't going to go off the rails. It's not going to get too scary, too bad, too dark. How do you go about creating that?
That's a good question. I don't know. I think it has to do with a feeling in my heart as I'm writing, I remember actually when I was writing the third Bat book, and my editor, my agent, who I love, Ruben Pfeffer, said, there's a question about baby cakes, the class rabbit. And he wanted me to kill off baby cakes to raise the tension. And I'm like, there's no way baby cakes is dying. Like, nobody's dying in this book. And I'm not against, I have a book called What Girls Are Made Of. And there's just a really tragic scene of the dog that dies in that book, which is like, there's a whole list on like books where the dog dies, where people put books and never read them because people, more than anything, don't want to read about animal cruelty, which is an interesting conversation when people are so willing to read such terrible things happening to people. But anyway, I'm not opposed to doing hard things to characters, but I just knew that the Bat books, that wasn't the place for it. And the same came with Harriet. Just this, I don't know, I think this book started with even its character, but also, I guess, tone. I just knew that these books, I wanted them to feel complicated, and I wanted them to center kids' big emotions and the way that even things that are little to grown-ups are incredibly big to children. But in a way that that felt like a hug. And we know what a hug feels like. So that's what I wrote. And there can be a lot of emotions in a hug, but there's also a sense, if it's a hug from someone you want, of being taken care of, even while you're feeling those big emotions.
Yeah, it's something I don't know if you know the answer, and I'm jumping ahead thinking of Bat, but Harriet also ends in a place where the things we want to happen, without spoiling, the things we want to happen have happened, and things come together, but it never feels overly saccharine. It never feels contrived. We feel that the character has earned that. I'm assuming that's multiple revisions until you get there. That doesn't happen the time one. But why is it that you're pulling it off when so many fail, you think?
Two answers. First of all, that is something that existed from the first draft, was the characters are for me the most natural thing. Like this book that I'm working on, the sequel, the ending, I nailed it. And the character arc, I nailed it. But the plot, the machinations of the plot are what I need to revise and work on. Why do I succeed in that where some people fail? I think it's because of my core belief, two core beliefs that I have. I have many. These are the two. Children are whole people already. They are not vessels to be filled, and they are not practiced humans. They are whole people, and all of their emotions are real. By the time a kid is like 3 or 4, they have felt almost all the big emotions. They have felt rage and love and shame, right? And joy and pride. The things that we write about, children have those things. We don't need to manufacture them or make them big or like simplify them. Children are whole people. And so if you write about whole emotions, children will respond in the same way any other person will. The other core belief I have is that our job as writers for and about children is to make good art. Our job is not to teach a lesson or convince kids and to provide them with like a saccharine pill. Our job is to tell a good story, and good stories involve emotion and involve touching the shared thread of humanity. Will a kid learn lessons from my book? It's none of my business. It is absolutely none of my business. My business is to be a human and to tell a good story. And so I think where authors often fail is that I see a lot of people say, well, I want to write this book because I want to teach this lesson. I want to show kids that. And sometimes they're really nice lessons even. But it's like, well, then just tell them that thing. Don't write a book. Why make them sit through a whole book if you could tell them a thing in 2 sentences? So a book is not a device through which to, in my opinion, a book is not a device in which to deliver a lesson. A book is a reflection on shared humanity and an opportunity to experience art through story. So there you go. That's why I think some people fail. I think they privilege, either they privilege lesson over story, or they privilege business over art, and often both.
I'm going to push back just a little, not because I have any wish to argue when I've already established that you win.
Well, I say in my opinion, so I'm happy to argue about it. I'll defend my opinion.
No, not argue. I just want to hear your thoughts on this, to where it had challenged my assumption so I could figure out where I'm not quite getting it. Because I know that when you write a story, because a story is going to have a theme, just by the virtue of the fact that you're going to pick your hero and the hero is going to achieve their goal one way or another, the way through which they achieve the goal is therefore presumably a desirable quality that the reader would want to take on for themselves so they can achieve likewise. So knowing that that's baked in, that's going to be there theoretically in the story, do you lean into that at any point after it's written, or is it stay away from it, it's not your business?
I would say I do my best. And I think where I fail as a writer sometimes is when what I believe about what lesson I want people to get, it shows up when you can see that, or when it's too heavy-handed. I think in Red Hood, if anything, if I could revise anything, I would do one more pass for tucking in myself and hiding myself better in that story. I love the book. I'm very proud of it, but I wrote it and I rewrote it during a period of time during which I was blindingly, viscerally, just like a hot sun angry about the world, about politics, about Kavanaugh, about Christine Blasey Ford being subjected to interrogation. Those things, all stories come from somewhere, and that story, a lot of it came from there. And it also, of course, whatever's happening now brings up what happened to us then. So what happened to her brought up for me a lot of my own past stories and trauma that culminated in that book in a way that I think is very powerful, but I also think maybe prefaces in some places lesson over story. So I think I succeed best when I say, no, my job is just to tell a good story. It's none of my business who reads my book. I absolutely do not want to privilege theme over plot, character, and setting. In fact, I think theme is the hidden secret door that we get to discover in our stories as writers in revision. I think if you go out and say, well, this is really a book about da-da-da-da-da, I think you're really undercutting the potential of the story to surprise you. So one of the greatest surprises I get as a writer during revision is when I discover things the book is about that I didn't know the book is about. And theme, I think, is one of the most, and this is something I talk about a lot when I teach, is theme. I think it's one of the most misunderstood qualities of a book. I think we think of themes like, well, this is like, you say Damsel. You could say, oh, that's a book about gaslighting. And that's a book about sexism and patriarchy. Well, that's not theme. Those are just words. So to me, that's like figuring out what the words of the book are is just the first step in figuring out what the book's theme is. The second step is, well, what questions about those words is this book asking? So then a question might be, what happens when a young woman has been so gaslit that she doesn't know who she is? So that's the second step in discovering the theme. First is the word, gaslit and patriarchy. The second is what happens when a girl has no idea who she is. And then the third thing is more what the theme of the book is. Like, what's the belief that you have as a person? It's a belief, not a truth, that answers that question. And that, I think, would be one of the book's themes or thematic core. So, for example, like with Damsel, I would say maybe the book is about patriarchy. But then I might say, well, that's too big. So what's the question it's asking about patriarchy? How does one save oneself from a system that was rigged against them? Might be the question. And the answer I think that Damsel has for that is that sometimes when you are freeing yourself from a system or a relationship that is toxic, you can't save anybody but yourself. Now that is not an answer that I'm proud of necessarily. I don't like the idea that this book tells people, like, if you're in a bad situation, get yourself out of it at all costs. And even if you have to leave others behind, do it. Because that feels gross to me, right? The idea that no man should be left behind, right? We should all, everyone or no one, let's all get, like, that's the more heroic view. But the truth is that when I have had to leave toxic situations, I was not at a place where I could save anybody myself. I could only barely get myself out. And that is a truth that book, I think, shares. It's my truth. It's not necessarily the truth. It's a core belief that I apparently have, is that it's okay to abandon others if you need to get yourself out of a violent and unsafe home or situation. So when I discovered that was a truth of this book, Damsel, part of me wanted to rewrite the book to make it better, to make it nicer, to make it more heroic, to make it so that when the damsel leaves, sorry about the plot spoilers, she manages to free the whole kingdom. But that would be privileging lesson over story, because the story is about one character finding her path toward recognizing herself and getting out. So I think it's a better story because it's more complicated and less clear. And I also think it's more true to me for those reasons. But I think if you want to talk about it being a book that teaches a lesson, you get people really upset because they don't like the lessons that it teaches. And I see that in some people's discourse about that book and Red Hood too. Even with Bat, there's some people who don't like the ending of Bat because they think that, Thor should have been released because he's a wild animal. Wild animals should never be kept as pets. And the story, the moral they want that book to be teaching is, why wild animals shouldn't be kept as pets is like the lesson they want kids to learn, which I think is like, well, okay, then you go ahead and write that book. That's not the book I wrote.
So if you'd followed the Rob Kent school of thought there and leaned in toward theme and lesson ahead of time, you wouldn't have had that insight to yourself and find out that truth that is true for you until you see it there on the page. Am I not upright?
And to me, that's the gift that's the gift the story gives the writer, is that I now know myself better through having written the book and struggled with the book and pushed back against something that kind of horrified me that the book told that I didn't even know I necessarily thought. And then I realized, this book was about me. All books are about me that I write. I mean, this book was it's a story about a damsel and a dragon and a prince, but really it speaks to my residual shame that when I left a home that was unsafe, I went away to college, I left behind a brother and a sister, who were quite a bit younger than I was, and I couldn't save them. All I could do was get out. And this is like the stuff of therapy, right? The stuff that I continue to apologize for to my siblings, even though what could I have done? I was a kid too. But that's what Damsel is largely about, I think, too, is this unresolved truth in my life. And I think that's what good fiction to me is for the writer, because again, the only person that you're ever going to know who's really going to read your book is you. And so trying to make it something for everyone, I can't do that. I don't know what everyone needs. I don't even know what I need. But it's through writing and revising and re-examining and asking these hard questions. What are the words of the book? What questions about the world around those words is this book asking? And what does it seem to be telling us as its answer? I learn a lot about myself.
Does that scare you at all, knowing that you're going to learn things about yourself that you don't know going in and can't plan for ahead of time?
Nah.
No problem at all. Why would I even ask?
I mean, I'm an interesting person, you know? We're all interesting people. People are interesting. I think people are fascinating. And so it should be true that there are multitudes. We all contain multitudes. And that's why I think I write across so many different age categories, and why I feel like I'm successful at it, knock on wood, is because of my belief that people are interesting and we all contain multitudes, and there are so many different ways to look at one life and so many different lenses through which we can view ourselves and our struggles. I don't think I cannot separate writing and humaning. To me, they are the same. And so to be a better writer and to continue to grow as a writer, I must continue to interrogate my beliefs and my flaws from different angles.
You mentioned writing from different perspectives, having written picture books, middle grade, young adult, now, knock on wood, soon to be an available adult book. Does your process change very, very much between those? I mean, obviously, I'm sure there are some things that change, but as far as how you approach the story and how you work?
No, my job is to tell a good story the best way I can. That's my whole job. And to try to keep everyone else out of the room as long as possible. Those are things I've found to be successful. If I find a spot that feels painful, push there. Don't turn away from the things that feel like you're not ready to write them. Because you could be dead by the time you're ready to write them. And what a shame that would be if you didn't explore that facet of yourself now. No, when I sit down to write a picture book, and I've got a couple sitting right here next to me, actually. I mean, the tone is different in different cases. Like, I write some things that are silly and fun. Like, I have a series called Starla Jean, which came first, The Chicken or the Friendship. It's the first in a series, and it's funny and it's silly and it's voicey. And then I have a picture book called An Ordinary Day, about birth and death happening side by side in a neighborhood. And the tone is very different. The voice is very different, but they're all me. And I'm not special in that I don't contain more multitudes than you contain. We all contain multitudes, and we all have a right to tell many stories, and we all have a right to take up space. And we all have a right to explore that which fascinates, terrifies, titillates, and compels us.
Before I forget and move on here, what is the title? Is there an official title for Just Harriet 2? And when can we look forward to it being available?
Just Harriet 2 has a working title, but I don't think I'm supposed to share it yet because I'm pushing heavily for it and I'm hoping that it will land. We'll see. My editor did refer to it by its working title in the letter he wrote to me. So that's, fingers crossed. But I think it'll come out February. So this one comes out in February of 22, Just Harriet. And I believe the sequel will come out in February of 23, and the third book in the series the following year. There will be at least 3 books just like that in this series.
So when did you, and if your editor is listening, if you want, you can just use this free of charge, Harriet Harder. You're welcome. When did you know that it was going to be 3 books rather than just 1?
Well, I wanted it to be, I liked that structure very much. There's an arc that goes across the whole 3 books, which is what will happen with Bat and Thor. And then within that, there's an arc for each story. And I, found that to be very satisfying as a writer. And I think a lot of readers found it to be satisfying as well. And so I wanted another series. So it was pitched as a series that would have an over arc along with smaller churns within each book that moves toward that arc.
That makes sense, because I was wondering as I got Bat 2, which we'll talk about here in a moment, that seems like something that should have come up in book 1 that you would have gone to immediately. But if you knew ahead of time that you had 3 books to work with, that you got time to space that out, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your writing day, and then by God, let's talk about BAT. But you had written in that interview available exclusively at middlegradeninja.com. As of December of 2018, let's see, your writing process was that you wrote 15 to 20 hours per week. And then you read about 10 hours per week, and you spent another 10 to 15 hours doing businessy stuff, emails, communication with editors, school visits, all that type of stuff. Where are we at now, and how has the pandemic changed that?
I mean, I probably made up those numbers for you for that question.
So it's a little bit different every week.
Yeah. Yeah, it's totally different every week. The pandemic has definitely changed things. School visits are virtual now, which I think is probably better for the planet. The world doesn't really need to fly me all over the place for me to talk to students as much as I enjoy it. Seems like a pretty big gas carbon footprint, although I'll probably will return to doing some school visits in person nonetheless when the time is available. I mean, it totally depends on where I am. You know, if I'm working on a revision, sometimes I will just work on my revision. And that's, or actually the most intense I usually get is when I'm writing a first draft of something. When I'm creating, I get obsessed with it, and all I can do is think about it, and all I want to do is work on it. And that means that even when I'm not working on it, I'm thinking and dreaming about it. And so, you know, I probably was trying not to be too obnoxious with my estimates, but you know, I mean, I would say that when I'm in the throes of creating a story, when I'm first falling in love with it, it's like a new romance. Like, it's everywhere. It's everything I see. I'm like, that could be in the story. Everywhere I go, I'm like, that person looks kind of interesting and could be in the story. Every experience I have becomes fodder for that creative process. It's like falling in love, you know, it's on your mind all the time. So other stuff might become a little bit less front of mind, like businessy stuff or showering. Like, all I can want to do is work on the thing. When it comes to, so I'd say it's like a season, you know, how I follow, you know, different things become the thing that I'm working on. Now I work for Hamline, so I have students work that comes to me. I'll have packets coming on the 13th. And so I will set aside several days where all I will do is work on my students' packets, and I'll spend the afternoons on various other businessy stuff, but I won't have any headspace to be creative or work on my own revision even. And that's why my students find me to be such a responsive teacher, is because I set aside those first few days just to work on their work, and then I'm off it goes, and I'm back to my thing. So I respond very quickly to students' work for that reason. So, you know, lots of reasons. One is I'm really excited to read what they wrote. Another one is because I can't necessarily hold both things in my head at the same time, so I have to clear it away. But those numbers you read, you know, are probably vaguely accurate. Although I don't think I ever stopped being a writer, you know? So I guess it's 24 hours a day even that stories are on my mind in one form or another.
I hope the students appreciate that the rest of us are not going to maybe get another book that would have been available had they not had your complete attention.
But their books will be, and I'll have gotten to put my hand into their process and hopefully help them find out what their multitudes are, and help them find the stories that are most specifically, organically, uniquely their own. And that is a great privilege as a writer, when another writer allows you into their head, and when you have the time and space to go in, it's a huge act of faith to share your work with a teacher or a mentor, and to allow them, you know, or an editor actually, to allow them to put their oar in, as Matthew and Marilla used to say about the raising of Anne. So I am grateful to my students who let me do it. And I actually learn a lot about writing from being forced to say why something that's in their story isn't working, and figuring out why isn't it working. Almost always I go, oh yeah, I do that thing too. And now I'm a better writer from having had the opportunity to muck around in their stories.
Yeah, I never understand writers who don't read or who don't want to critique other people. So what are you talking about? If you're going to run an obstacle course, the first thing you want is somebody else to run it ahead of you and see where they fall down. And then you can go in there and it's a little bit smoother for you.
It is really helpful. Yeah, absolutely.
How much time are you spending at Hamline?
Well, we have residency every January and July. It's a low residency program. So it's 12 days twice a year. 3 is my ideal number of students. And they send me a packet of work 4 times during the semester, which I then respond to. And then the last couple of years, we've been Zooming after they have had some time to think about my response. We have a conversation.
That's got to be incredibly competitive to get in the program. If you could be one of 3 working one-on-one exclusively with you.
Well, there's a lot of us at the program. There's a number of us teachers, and I learned so much from my fellow faculty. Lisa Young-Clow and Co Booth and Brandy Colbert and Elliot Schrafer and Nina LaCour. I mean, we have this incredible faculty, Laura Ruby, Ann Ursu, Kelly Barnhill, Meg Medina. It's such a fantastic, I learned so much from going to residency and listening to my mentors talk. So I think it's a fantastic program. So I do that, but I also teach online. I teach 2 courses. One is called Revision Season, which I just finished up with. It's a 7-week deep dive intensive course into revising a novel. And then I also teach a class called Vision Season, which is a 7-week deep dive into questions around where do our ideas come from and how can we find more of them. So I teach those sort of a few times a year. And you can visit me at elanakarnold.com to learn more about those classes if you're curious.
Yeah, what's the short version of where do ideas come from and how can we get more of them?
I think I think ideas are everywhere, and letting go of the idea that ideas are precious and that there's one right idea. And if you don't find that one right idea, you can't start writing. And instead just, well, what if everything is interesting? And what if everything is a story? And what if it's more about attention and presence than it is about picking the right idea? It has been incredibly freeing for me, and I think for other writers too. The world is full of beautiful and interesting and terrifying things. Anything can become the vehicle for exploring the questions that you have about yourself and the universe. And so you don't need to necessarily go on this giant hunt to find, the exact right word, le mot juste or whatever. I think instead, what if whatever it is that you're seeing around you right now is the thing that you work with, and you let go of the fear that it's dumb or that it's not important, and instead you embrace, this is interesting, and this will lead somewhere interesting if I keep following it. That's something, again, that I think I have learned. I have come to believe as a writer through seeing it happen over and over again in my own work, that it doesn't necessarily matter why I'm interested in something. If I'm interested in it, I can write about it. That was certainly true about A Boy Called Bat. I don't know why I chose a skunk. I just thought they were cute. I thought they were interesting. I wanted to know more about them. They're adorable. Have you ever seen a little baby skunk? They're so cute. And there's this really interesting dynamic with the skunk that, yes, they're really cute, but what if they spray you? That's super interesting to me. And I didn't know all the beautiful things I would explore and find when I started. And if I told myself, why skunks are dumb, that's dumb, I can't do that, I would have shut a door that has been such a wonderful story and has meant so much to so many kids and their parents actually too. So one of my core beliefs about being a writer is don't tell yourself no. If you have a good idea, if you have an idea, follow your idea. Don't tell yourself it's dumb. It's kind of like improv. Your job is in improv. There's 2 of you. One of them says something and the other one says yes and, right? You're not allowed to say no. You're not allowed to say no, that's a dumb idea in the improv. You have to say yes and. So the same with ideas. When I have an idea, I tell myself yes and I follow it. If you tell yourself no, you don't even know why you have that idea, because the back of your brain gave it to you for some reason that you can't see from here. So if you tell yourself, no, that's a dumb idea, eventually you're going to train the back of your brain to stop giving you ideas, I think. So if instead I just say, okay, yes, I'll do that, and it'll also be about this thing, and I just play, then it's about unclenching. Unclench is my new favorite word around writing. Play is hard because you can't make yourself play, right? But you can allow yourself to unclench. And so if you can unclench, and instead of focusing on what if it's dumb? What if people don't like it? What if it doesn't sell? What if it's a dead end? If instead you say, oh, that's interesting, we'll see where that leads. What you learn later, again, it's like with that question of thematic hearts that you discover, is you're like, oh, now I understand why I was so interested in that thing. Like, you don't know it when you come up with it. Later, with some distance, you can say, oh, I was really smart of me. Huh, that's super interesting. Now, does that mean that you pick the one magic thing? No, I think any number of things could be a right thing. I do not believe in the one true path. I do not believe in the one true love. I believe that life is interesting and people are interesting. And there are absolutely uncountable interesting paths that you could take to create an interesting story.
So do you
I
believe
feel better.
destiny, soulmates, any of that? Or no, it's just make the most of what comes along?
Everything is interesting. Like, I love my partner and I'm very glad that we're married. But no, I don't think that either one of us, had we not met, would have been destined to a life of solitude and unhappiness. There's a million zillion interesting people in the world. I think there are a million zillion opportunities for story and for love. I'm super glad at the hand I was dealt, and that I took, that I said yes and to it. But yeah, no, I'm not, I don't know. I mean, smarter people than I have talked about fate and destiny in interesting ways. I kind of figure it's one of those questions that's so unknowable that it's not even very interesting. I'm much more interested in what is my dog barking at in that bush, and why that bush, and why last night and not the night before. And then you find there's a raccoon, and raccoons have very fascinating little hands. And that is something, and what is that raccoon holding in its little hands? And where did it get that thing? And what if I put that in a story? What could the raccoon have in its hands? Like, that is more interesting to me. That is something I can actually comprehend and hold on to.
Well, with that philosophy, you can't be messing around a whole lot with writer's block. You must just be running on whatever it is that you're interested in.
I get stuck all the time, but I also have a very good solution for writer's block. To me, it has turned out over and over again that if I don't know what to write next, I need to do more research. So again, when I was writing A Boy Called Bat, when I didn't know what to write next, I learned more about skunks. And when I learned more about skunks, I thought, oh, that's something that could happen in this story. And it led me to the next thing. But research doesn't just mean learning about the factual stuff. It also can mean thinking about yourself and looking inward and thinking about what you feel. And that is a kind of research that I think a lot of times might get overlooked by writers who get very focused on plot. I think plot is overprivileged when it comes to writing. I think plot's important, but I don't think it's the most important. And so spending time thinking about emotions and your own memories from your own childhood can yield doorways out of being stuck.
Do you have a bunch of unfinished manuscripts someplace? Like, here's an idea I followed. I'm just trying to think of what the contrarian thing is. Why wouldn't we want to do this? Because it's a very good sales pitch. Am I missing something? Because why wouldn't I do this way, your way from now on? If you have an idea and it's interesting, even if it's not because you find it's interesting, by virtue of that, it will become interesting. Am I interpreting that kind of correctly?
Very much so. It already is interesting. You just need to be interested and notice. That's what I think. I mean, no, I don't have unfinished manuscripts. I have some picture book ideas that I haven't quite cracked yet. Picture books are like poems. But no, I don't have unfinished or unsold books.
Let's talk a bit about A Boy Called Bat, because I've got all kinds of questions about that one as well. But per my promise, I will not summarize your book. So what the esteemed audience needs to know, like they don't know, what do they need to know about A Boy Called Bat?
A Boy Called Bat is a story about a kid with autism. His name is Bixby Alexander Tam, Bat for short, whose mother is a veterinarian, and one day she brings home an orphan skunk kit, and he becomes determined to keep and care for it. And it's the story of him learning to become the world's best skunk caretaker, and at the same time forming and deepening relationships with the humans in his life as well. And I think one of the things that makes Bat so successful is also it's a book full of adults too who are very interested in keeping and caring for Bat. And so I think it has a unique charm of a lot of interesting characters who are very interested in doing right by one another, which maybe doesn't sound like a great setup for a conflict, but yeah, that is not the conflict of the book.
Nope, there's plenty. There's a never-ending shortage of conflict in Beth's world. Possibly a dumb question, but I'm gonna ask it anyway. When you have a book that blows up and you become a little bit known for, this is the Elana K. Arnold brand, is A Boy Called Bat. Is that at all bothersome when you well, no, I also want to tell werewolf stories? Are you just happy that somebody showed up and great, I love that book too, so I'm glad you do as well?
I think A Boy Called Bat and just Harriet, those books contain the facets of me of which I am the most purely proud. The parts of myself that I love the most. I'm in all my books, but sometimes what I'm exploring, especially my YA, is the parts of me that unsettle me or disturb me or gross me out or fill me with shame. But the books that I write in this, these 20,000, 25,000 word younger middle grade novels, for some reason, allow me access to the part of me that is, of which I am the most proud. The way I care and keep for the people I love, the way I parent, the way I take care of animals, the way I nurture. And so if I am known just for A Boy Called Bat even, I will be just deeply proud that the world has seen that part of me and loves it.
With A Boy Called Bat, I'm sure you know that, I know you know, that if you've met a person with autism, you've met a person with autism. It's a big, huge, wide spectrum. There are all kinds of behaviors on it. When you sit down to create a character with autism, how much time do you spend focusing on the parts of him that would be determined by autism, and then how much time do you spend making sure you're differentiating and creating Bat, and how do you create a character like that?
Well, I think I don't separate out the parts of him that mark him as a person with autism versus the parts that mark him as a person who loves animals, or a person with a sibling, or a person who has sometimes contentious relationship with his dad, or a person who loves research, or a person who has a spare bed just in case someday a friend will want to spend the night. He's a whole person. And so all of it is present in every turn and every choice. I spent a lot of time researching. I learned a lot about inclusive classrooms when I wrote A Boy Called Bat, because I wanted a school that was had an inclusive classroom where kids who are neuroatypical are shared space with neurotypical kids. I base a lot of the way Mr. Grayson teaches and the way his mom, Valerie Tam, parents on the way I believe children should be treated, and the way I try to treat children, both as a teacher when I was in the classroom and as a parent, and just as a human walking alongside other humans who happen to be younger and more vulnerable. And I learned a lot about autism. I knew a lot about autism already for various reasons going into writing of the book, but I, of course, spent a lot more time doing even more research. I learned about skunk husbandry. I don't know if you know this, maybe you do. Dr. Jerry Dragoo, in addition to being a character in my book, is a real skunk scientist. Did you know that? I know because I read it in your book. Yeah, he's a real person. And I got to know him and learn about the care and keeping of skunks from his perspective. So, I mean, I don't, just like that, how I kind of laughed when you read how many hours I'd said I spent doing various parts of my author life. And I am remembering now, I think I just figured I had to come up with numbers. And so I said those numbers, but they're estimates. I don't know. I think the same is true with this question is that is a whole person. And so therefore everything about him is important. And none of it, I think, necessarily takes precedence over other parts. In revision, I spent some time, and we had an author with autism read the book and give us input. I wanted to make sure that I wasn't falling into harmful tropes that I couldn't see, and I had in a couple of spaces, and we revised. And so that's the, I guess, sort of the craft and business side of things, as opposed to the art. So, yeah. Did I answer the question?
You did, and I think maybe the question itself was not asked as well as I would have liked. Alas, that should be the real name of the show. The question that if I'd had 20 drafts to revise would have been about right, but live and on the fly, yeah, we'll see. But what came to you first? Did Bat come to you as a character whole, or did you know this is a boy who loves the skunk? Let's find out more about that. How much of a character did you have going in, and then how much do you discover as you're going along?
So in the book Far From Fair, there's a character named Rex, who is the younger brother of the main character, Odette Zazowski. And he, although it's not named on the page, is a character with autism. And he falls a little bit into the trope because of the position from which the story is told of being the younger brother who causes problems for the main character, the character with autism who causes problems for the neurotypical character, which with some distance, I can see, I think Rex is a full character, and I hope that people who encounter that book feel that too, but everyone's going to have their own experiences. But when I sat down to write A Boy Called Bat, I knew I wanted to write a book that centered the younger brother type character, the kid who is the autistic character, who is now in the driver's seat of the story, who's the main character as opposed to a secondary character. So I knew that it was going to be a kid with autism. I knew he was going to be a younger brother. And I knew he was going to be super into animals. Those were the things I knew first about him. His name came very early too. My brother's name is Zach. It's spelled Z-A-K, but it's actually initials. His name is actually Z. Anton Kuczynski. The K is where my K is from. And we've always called him by his initials, Zach. Now remember, I told you my job is to notice things and then ask what if. In that case, I remembered, which is a type of noticing, that my brother's name was unusual. And I thought, well, what if I had a character who had an initial name too? What would his name be? And I came up with Bixby Alexander Tam. Alexander, after my father, who recently died. Bixby, I didn't realize it at the time, so we should follow ourselves. I think it's named after the neighborhood I lived in called Bixby Knolls when I was 9 years old. But I didn't even think about that. I thought I just made up the name Bixby. But of course I didn't, right? The back of my brain tossed it up like a dirt clod that I took and used. And Tam was his last name. So his name came, and then I thought, well, what kind of kid would want to be called Bat? He's like, well, he's got to really love animals. So that all sort of came together for me pretty early on.
And that's your way in, right? Because I think we've established as you're petting a cat as we're talking, you love animals, right?
I do. Yeah, I almost always am. Right now, this is Phoebe. She's my my giantess. I almost always have an animal on or next to me. They soothe me, and they give my day structure, and they give me an opportunity to be a caretaker in a way that feels really important to me. So yes, it was no question to me that there would be animals at the center of Boy Called Bat. In fact, there are animals, now that I'm realizing it, almost every book I write. Relationships between humans and animals are one of the through lines in almost all of my books.
This is just a pure curious thing on my part. And I know people tend to project onto authors, and which is terrible, because if you're reading about two characters in a marriage or anything else, they're going to be in conflict because that's how stories operate. And so my mom's always asking me if she's read something. Are you and your wife okay? Like, no, we're fine. The characters, they needed to fight, or there's nothing happening. So that's not how I mean the question, but I was curious, do you know what happened in the marriage of Bat's parents and when they separated and how that went down?
Well, I mean, I have theories, but what's on the page is the whole story. So any reader has as much ownership over anything I didn't put on the page, ownership to imagine, not ownership to like repackage and sell for money. As I do, they have everything that's there is there. And so anything you can extrapolate based on what's on the page in any of my books could be true. And anything that isn't there isn't there. So that's a fancy way of my saying, I have a story that I've told in my head to some level, but it's no more valuable than whatever story you would have told. Do you have a theory about what happened with Dr. and Mr. Tam?
Other than I think it was probably his fault. No.
Yeah, I don't know about faults, but yeah, it seems to me that Bat and his dad have a lot in common.
I don't need to know. I don't need to know
Yeah.
your story. I was just curious because they're such fully realized characters. If you knew.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Gotcha. That's so you. I'm assuming you have pretty much a whole lot of information on every character you write that we're not going to see on the page because it's not necessary there.
I mean, I have feelings. I have like I'm a synesthetic person. I have sort of synesthesia, so I have an interaction between. I have a cross wiring between different, which is I love different. What's the word? Senses. So, for example, for me, numbers have very specific personalities, and they have had since I was a kid. So when I think about my story, I don't know the facts of what dissolved their marriage necessarily, but I can feel the texture right here of it. And it influences the way the characters act on the page and the way the different parents parent their child in the story. So no, I don't have like a plot. Again, I think plot is probably overprivileged for what happened in the marriage, but I have a sensation of the texture of the marriage and where it rises and falls and where it's thicker and more dense and where it's more like threadbare. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah.
It does. I was rooting for Bat obviously the whole time. There's only two great instances of love at first sight I've actually bought into. One is Romeo and Juliet, and two is Bat meeting Thor for the first time. Like, okay. Well, in that case, I think love at first sight can exist. But I was so happy when, slight spoilers, I guess, but when Mom finds out that the dad's got a new girlfriend, and then Bat, I don't know if he intuits it but he starts talking about, hey, I want to be a vet like you and we can share a coat back and forth. Like, yes, Bat, that was exactly the right thing to say at that moment. You have cheered your mother up considerably. I feel so happy for her and so happy that he nailed that one after some of their interactions that don't go.
That's so interesting. I've never thought about that. See, that's what I mean about readers having as much ownership as the writers. Like, I never considered that Bat's mother might be feeling feelings around the new girlfriend in quite that way, or that Bat. I don't think Bat has any idea that he said the right thing in the moment.
No, I don't think he's aware.
Yeah,
of it.
That's interesting. Or maybe I did think that and I've just forgotten because it's been so long since I wrote the book. I have a terrible memory. I need to reread that scene now.
Well, you write books, write so many. That's what we're talking 5 books ago, 6 books ago.
Yeah, I have a terrible memory for. Sometimes I'll write something and I'll think to myself, did I write that already? And I'll have to like go like word search. Like I come up with a metaphor that I love, and I'll think to myself, oh, am I plagiarizing myself? And actually, I often will put the metaphor or whatever in a Google search for my own work, on my documents. And then I'll also wonder if I plagiarized some other writer. And so I'll Google search it on the net, to see if what I wrote was actually unique. Yeah.
I love finding those things in other writers' works where you see something in one book and it comes up again later, and then later, like, wow, that person really likes that thing.
Yeah. No, that's it. I try to at least, vary it a little bit though, as opposed to word for word.
Why, let's see, I'm watching our time, and I know it's flying by, which is what happens with a great conversation. It always flies by. And we talked about a lot of other things. I did want to ask, do you think there's a possibility that we might see more Bat at some point, maybe a little bit older, further on along?
Oh, that's such a great question. In some ways, that's sort of this is again, publishing is a business as well as is an art and a craft. Well, publishing is business, writing is the art and the craft. The thing about a series is that first books in series always sell the best, right? Any series ever, the first book will sell better than the second book because not everyone who reads the first book reads the second book. And so series, as my editor has said, is a game of diminishing returns because each book will sell fewer copies than its predecessor. And the first book will always sell the best. So from a business perspective, how could I entice my publisher to want to publish more Bat books? is an interesting question. But from a character perspective and an art perspective, what would I'm at the moment, I would have to see another 3-book arc for Bat, because my brain is very it sort of attaches itself to structures. And Bat to me is a 3-book arc. And so I would not want to write a 4th Bat book, because it would not fit within the arc. It would be, I have the arc and then I have this thing. So I would need to make another arc. So I would need another 3 books, I think. And right now I don't have another, like, I'm very happy the way I have left Bat and Thor and, you know, in the kitchen, where they started. If you read the beginning of book 1, they're in the kitchen, but it's just Bat and Janie, and there is disharmony. And if you look at the end of the 3rd Bat book, there's Bat surrounded by this circle, this growing circle of support in a place of harmony. So I feel very satisfied with the work I've done on that series and love Bat very much. So I would love to write more Bat books, but I would only do it if I felt I was compelled by another story that I had to follow. I'm sure I could probably sell if people would buy the 4th Bat book, but I wouldn't feel like, again, I think I would be privileging business over art if I didn't feel that there was another arc that I needed to explore with Bat.
Could we maybe have a cameo in Just Harriet 3 with a Vengeance? Or if maybe maybe could you ever see yourself doing a young adult or even an adult version of Bat, where some readers would come to it for the first time and they wouldn't even know that there was an original trilogy, and they're just encountering an all new story that happens to feature some of the same characters?
Anything I never thought about that. I'll have to think about it. Maybe. I sure love that character, Bat. I mean, so much of Bat is based, you know, I think all my characters are based a third on me, at least. Maybe Bat's a little more like 45%. A third people I have seen, known, or loved, and a third I have no idea. I think I made it up, but maybe I didn't. You never really know. So, you know, that third, a third, a third. And that's certainly true of Harriet as well. It's just different thirds that come in, and that's how I make different characters, I guess, is that a different third of me goes in versus the different people that I've met or loved versus different things I think I've made up. So, I mean, I'd never say never, but I don't have any plans to write another Bat book or another book with Bat as the main character at this point.
I'm going to hope that I've planted a seed, and that not now, not until maybe 2 Harriets from now, but eventually we see. But I'm curious, could you see Bat in a non-middle grade context, or is he always going to be in the 3rd, 4th grade, somewhere in that range?
That's a great question. I don't know. I don't usually, to me, the book exists as what it is. I don't spend a lot of time imagining my characters forward in time. One exception to that is Damsel. I don't think about Amma, the main character. I'm very clear about what happens to her and where she goes, but I'm very curious about, and I'm sure this must speak to my siblings. Remember how I talked about leaving my siblings behind? I'm very curious about the castle and the characters that are left behind after Amma disappears and frees herself. So that is interesting. That one I do spend some time sort of, I wonder what's going on with those characters now, in a way that usually when I'm finished with a book, to me, the book is the thing. And now I'm interested in this other thing. So. Sounds
to me like we're getting that book eventually.
Maybe. I am curious about what happened back at the castle. I have ideas.
We've been talking a lot about your brain and how it functions in relation to producing these stories. I know that because of a previous conversation we had, that as you were researching autism for the Bat books, you learned some things about your own brain. What did you learn? Well,
I mean, I'm not entirely sure. I mean, I know that my brain is neuroatypical, which I had always sort of known, but I didn't have that word. But I mean, like, the things that Bat does are all things I did as a kid, you know. Bat is a hand flapper when he gets excited or nervous. I was not a flapper, but I used to walk around, I still do, with my hands like this. And I got teased at no end by my family and by my schoolmates. You know, I got called T-Rex, I got called Mr. Burns, all kinds of things. But this just felt like a safe, good, nice place to put my hands, you know. I have incredible noise sensitivity. I never had a pair of earmuffs, but gosh, I wish I would have had. I wish that would have been seen as something I could have. I did go to a concert not too long ago with my 2 teens, and I wore my son's drumming earphones the whole time, and I enjoyed myself so much more hearing sound at a third of what it should be heard at. I absolutely am someone who has sensory integration issues. I would be overwhelmed in class. I didn't know how to make friends. I still find people to be a beautiful enigma, which is probably why I write about them. I was never diagnosed with anything as a kid because I was a girl in the 80s, which means that as long as I was reading books and not causing trouble, you know, sure, I was disorganized, and sure, I didn't have friends, and sure, I was physically awkward, and sure, I had food sensitivities and nothing could touch, and I had all these things, but mostly I was not a problem. And so I think I missed out on services that could have been useful for me, although who knows how much they existed when I was a kid, had I been identified as someone who needed extra help. So I learned a lot about myself through researching BAT, but also through people that ask me all these questions since BAT has come out about how did you write such a good character with autism as a neurotypical person, or as a person who's not autistic, how did you write such a great autistic character? And I find myself sort of bristling at those assumptions too, because I think there is sort of a very wonderful and important movement about, you know, own voices and people writing from a place of authenticity when you're writing about a marginalized community. And I respect and understand and agree. And because people contain multitudes, often not everything that someone is or that someone has access to is something they feel necessarily safe sharing publicly. So BAT has reached such a tipping point in its popularity. My editor says that we're like getting close to like 1 million copies of the BAT book sold, which is, I think we're like 850,000 or something now. It's a crazy number of books. That now I feel kind of compelled to talk about things because other people talk about me in a way that feels weird, you know, as far as like, I've seen a couple of people write about like neuro, even nice things, you know, neurotypical authors who did it right, you know, and almost like why we should be able to write about neuroatypical people as neurotypical people, because Elana did. Well, first of all, I think people should be able to write about whatever they want, and other people should be able to have any opinion they want about what that author did right or wrong. So one can write any story one wants, and other people will and can and should have their own opinions about that too. You might not like that. So writing something and publishing it are kind of different things. Anyway, at this point, I kind of feel like, well, the cat's, you know, the horse is out of the barn, you know, and I didn't talk a lot about my own brain and my own diagnoses and my own thoughts about myself, honestly, in large part because of health insurance. I have lived, like I've mentioned now about being sick, I have lived through a time when I was unable to get health insurance because the Affordable Care Act didn't exist, and my husband got laid off and we were traveling, and I already had another pre-existing condition before I got so sick, and I was denied health coverage because it was before Obamacare, and we were unable to insure me. And that was terrifying and anger making. And so the idea of like publicly announcing diagnoses of any kind, physical or mental, scares me and makes me uncomfortable, because Obamacare is a thing, but we've seen our country shifting in large ways, some quite terrible and frightening. And just on a personal level, I worry about things like access to healthcare. And then we see people, you know, people make different decisions about how they want to talk about their loved ones. I worry about privacy and how much I understand the desire to know that things are being written from a place of authenticity and research, but I also understand the desire to privacy and protect. So it's a fuzzy line, and each author has to make one's own decision about how to deal with such things. But I think the truth is all of us need to do very careful, thorough, good research about whatever we're writing about, whether it's lived experience or not. And we need to listen to other people who might know more about an experience than we do, and take if someone's willing to give us input, to not figure out all the reasons why they're wrong, and instead consider that they might be helping us.
Something that bugs me once in a while when I see conversations like that happening, is I'll see, so and so must be thinking terrible thoughts about the world, and this is their manifesto because they portrayed this character wrong. And I'll look at it like, no, that's just bad writing, which is a shame. I wish that they had written a better thing than what they wrote, but they're not twisting an evil mustache. They just should have had a little bit of stronger craft in that particular instance.
Yeah. Or sometimes, as someone I think I've had some of my work interpreted in a way that feels not great, is sometimes people aren't reading the book carefully enough too. Like I will just take Red Hood as an example. I've read some people who say that book is bad because its lesson is that we should kill boys who are sexual predators. And that's just such a unfinished theory to come up with if you read that book, because that book is, first of all, it's about werewolves, and it's kind of a superhero book, and it's so interesting because it's about a girl who there are deaths at her hand, but she's not killing boys, she's killing werewolves. These boys have transformed into werewolves and they're trying to kill her or the people she loves, and she kills them instead. And the lesson people get is, well, couldn't she have figured out some better way? And not all boys are wolves. It's like, well, the book never said they were. So sometimes I feel like, yes, it's bad craft. And maybe someone could argue that my book was bad craft. I would argue the opposite. Sometimes it's lazy reading too. I guess I'm just being a little personal in my understanding of people's interpretation of that book in particular. So I do think a book, if you're going to be a critic, I do think that one has an obligation to be thorough and thoughtful, and not just necessarily lead with reaction. I'm
reminded of something that somebody that I had a lot of ire with in my youth, Joel Schumacher, a director who made Batman and Robin, which I have not completely forgiven him for. But in the director's commentary, he said something to the effect that I've been receiving hate mail and death threats for 20 years. And it's like, okay, I get that you're upset, people, but there was a war on. There were real issues that you should have been concerned with. And that's what I think of sometimes when I see people going off on young adult authors or whatever. I realize that talking about young adult literature or middle grade is far more fun than talking about real life things. But if you're going to focus that ire toward creating change in a society, leave the poor authors alone. They're doing the best they can. Let's focus on folks with some real power to do things.
Yeah, I get that. And I also get that if you are an author, you are in a position of privilege and power. You've gotten to do the thing that most people don't. You've gotten to publish your book and get paid for it. And as much as I might disagree with people's commentary, and sometimes I do wish people would be more careful readers, I also understand that it's their right to think whatever they want about my book. So it's a double-edged sword. Any question about commentary and ownership of story, like I know I'm kind of saying the opposite of what I just said, but I also think that one of my greatest abilities as a human in my 40s is that I've come to be able to hold two disparate truths in my head at the same time. And I find that to be very true, that yes, people should be more careful with their words. And as a writer, I am public fodder. And it's none of my business what people think of my book. And it's probably, I should look away and not read reviews. Especially not Goodreads.
I know some authors who assure me they never read their reviews, and I believe them, but I do. Do you read your reviews, or have you?
I do read my reviews. I'm really trying not to, because I do find these to be less helpful, and I think these are for readers and not for writers. I have been a Goodreads reviewer, but I have I think it's helpful if it helps you be more creative to read your reviews, or if it helps you to be more insightful. But if it just sort of hurts you and makes you not want to write, then it's time to look away. Because each of us contains multitudes, and none of our job is to craft a perfect lesson. Our job is to tell interesting stories the best we can. And so I'm trying to not go to Goodreads.
Well, having said that, you accept that you have some responsibility as a young adult author, as an author, you write everything we've established, all the genres, all the things. But as an author, what responsibilities do you feel that you have?
My job is to tell a good story the best I can, and to acknowledge that I am one voice in a sea of voices, that many of which know more and have more experience and more breadth than I have. So I think one of my responsibilities is to continue to grow my knowledge of the world around me, and the body of work being created by my peers and my mentors, and to defer often to someone who has a better ability to tell a story than I can. Not every story necessarily has to be told by me. I'm greedy, I'm an author. I'm a storyteller. We're all like crows, like we see things and we want them. But more and more I've started to ask myself, I could do this, but is there something I could be doing that I could do better? Because I know that there's other authors out there who can do this other thing better than I can, and more honestly than I can. So when I'm in that early falling in love with the story idea, better than I used to be, I don't necessarily think that I am necessarily the person who can do the best job. I mean, it's funny because authors, we both think we're God, and we think we're the lowliest worm, right? Like both, I can create worlds, and at the same time, who am I? Why should anyone even listen to me? Again, containing multitudes, holding both truths in my head at the same time. There's this wonderful Jewish tradition. You hold two pieces of paper, one in each pocket, and one says, "The world was created for me. I am, child of God." And in the other pocket, "I am dirt and dust, and I shall be dust again." And both of those are true. So again, I don't think you can separate. I cannot separate writing from humaning. My job as a human is both to believe that I am unique and special, and my life is important and valuable, and to understand that I am a dot in the enormity of humanity. And as a writer, I am both one voice, and it is my voice, and so therefore it is important. And I am in a chorus. I am one in a chorus of people telling stories. And so I have a responsibility to listen to the chorus and to be in conversation with other voices. I don't think I have a responsibility. I know some writers feel like if they're writing for children, then they have a responsibility to be moral, tell moral stories, or teach lessons to their readers, or maybe something more complicated than that I can't quite put my right on. But I think my responsibility is to the story. Readers get to decide if they pick it up. But again, this speaks to my belief that I don't think we should make children read certain things either. I think every reader has their own journey that they should be on.
Now I have a real quandary, because on the one hand, we've reached the perfect conclusion to a delightful conversation. On the other hand, esteemed audience knows that there's one question still awaiting, because I always ask, and I would never let esteemed audience down. So Elana K. Arnold, have you ever seen a flying saucer and or a ghost?
No. Well, I live in a house right now that may or may not be haunted. Yes, it's 100 years old, and I know at least one person has died here, and it's a very interesting old house. But no, I've never seen a ghost or a flying saucer.
Well, so far, but now that you're living in a haunted house story, by God, when we get together and we do this again, you're going to have a whole stockpile of.
It's possible. I would be fine with that. I would be surprised. I'd be less surprised to see a flying saucer than a ghost.
This has been an absolute delight, and I'm looking forward to going back and enjoying it again, where I no longer have the nervousness of having to think of the next question. I can just enjoy the fullness of the answer. Oh my God, what brilliant things were said. And it happened to be said in a place where I also was. This is just wonderful. Thank you so much again for making the time. Where can esteemed audience find you online, follow you on social media and all that good stuff?
I am at Elana K. Arnold on Instagram and Twitter. I have a Facebook author page, but I never post. I probably should shut it down because I don't even know how to use it. And you can come to my website. It's elanakarnold.com, and you can learn more there if you're a teacher about having me visit your community of readers. Or if you are a writer, you can learn more about my classes revision season and vision season, both of which I'll be offering again at some point in 2022. I have a newsletter you can sign up for if you want to be among the first to hear when those courses open, or just send me an email. I never respond to snail mail, but unless it's a bill, but I always respond to emails. So feel free to write to me. And thank you so much for having me here. I really appreciate it, Rob. It's been a really interesting and good conversation. And I really appreciate your thoughtful questions and how many of my books you engaged with.
Oh, I've got a couple of pages we didn't even get to, so I'll save those for another time. Those classes, those will be virtual, right? So anybody in the world who's listening to us can.
Yep. They are online classes that involve weekly packet work to help you through recorded lectures, between 1 and 3 lectures a week. They're very intensive classes. I would say they're akin to a university or graduate school master class, each of the classes. And they involve an online forum and a weekly group call with me and everyone who's enrolled in the class to discuss what we did that week and ask questions for further edification. And so it's a big commitment of time, the class. And I'm very proud of the classes I've made. So
I think has gotten a very good idea listening to us today, what they can be expecting.
You will certainly be hearing some of what I've talked about today in either one of those courses. Yeah.
Well, as always, esteemed audience, for more information about me, more important information about authors, editors, literary agents, publicists, all the world's best people, go to middlegradeninja.com, download your free copy of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees, and God willing on alive. I'll see you next week.